not only the physical ability, but the mental ability to pay attention for longer. By the time I'm tired of drilling a move, I'm like, I'm fucking tired of this. It doesn't work. He can do it for another 2 hours, which means like if you just, that's an exponential rate, right? That is compound interest. These are answers to your most burning questions about endurance training, how it fits in, how you've had deficiencies. I opened up kind of a Q&A, and this is kind of a summary of like most of the questions. They were split between a couple different categories. I am going to get into those, but I first want to talk kind of about just the endurance program which launched this week in general and why these questions kind of overlay on top of why I wrote a program like I did. Most endurance programs they are trying to get you good at a very specific endeavor, like running or cycling, something that is a sport. There's probably an event coming up, and most people train like this because they're worried about not being able to finish it, which is why, you know, it's an endurance effort. It's really testing the limits of your actual endurance. So this program is not for that. This is not for an event. It's really based off of developing aerobic ability generally. And that's a huge difference between kind of like what people do now when they, you know, think of endurance. They're mostly like, I want to get good at cycling or running. And that will, you know, to some degree, that will define whether I'm good at endurance or not. If you've done any of those specifically, you'll know that they don't cross over. Getting good at cycling and developing an ability to ride for 30, 40 hours a week on a bike produces a massive amount of very specific aerobic base. Now, there is some crossover, but it's not like you can just go run for 3 or 4 hours a day because you biked. So the aerobic system is really going to be limited on the localized muscular endurance as well. That's why, you know, you have to do the movements specifically that you kind of want to get good at. If I was a good runner, and I could run for hours on end, that doesn't actually also apply directly onto a bike. Even though you get rid of kind of the small muscular part, you get rid of the ability to flush lactate at high levels, because a running cadence and a cycling cadence are two totally different kind of mechanisms or feelings or sensations when it comes to reducing the amount of lactate that you're producing or staying out of that like ventilatory threshold. So when people come to train and they just want a good endurance base, they usually just like go to a side cart of what the best endurance athletes do, which is like running, cycling, skiing, something like that. That is kind of what we steered clear of. So the program is actually designed specifically to not get good at a thing, but to develop general aerobic abilities through pacing a lot of different movements. This includes obviously running and cycling, because those are like a bedrock of easy movements to extend effort by, but also body weight movements like lunges and air squats and step ups and burpees and sled pushing and carrying, and even getting into skiing and rowing and other machine use. There's nothing that's off limits. In fact, one of the things that I wanted to design this program around was the idea that you should make it your own. You should do the movements that you think map on to what you want to be efficient at. And that's how it should work. I shouldn't tell you what to do. Now, we give a lot of good examples, and we do spend some time getting good at running or cycling or whatever you pick as kind of your monostructural movement, but that isn't the focus of it. So a lot of these questions that I'm getting actually, you know, from this kind of survey is that people are very confused about how to balance all of this stuff. You know, there's a lot to do in a gym. Even if I am already fit, in fact, the more fit you become, kind of the more annoyed you get, because the more you realize that you have to do to keep things up. Not only am I going to lose my strength if I don't squat every day, I'm going to lose my aerobic capacity if I don't do hard intervals every day. And this becomes kind of hand in the cookie jar syndrome. Well, this endurance program is kind of built to add in or layer into things that I think most people can and will do, and that is also a big difference with it. We have two different tracks. One of them is like kind of beginner based, maybe not even beginner, it's more like supportive in nature. Like if you use that track, you'll be able to do other things with it because it's not just overwhelmingly the signal. The other one is you need a real bass, and that should be the real focus. Now you can layer in other things, but those things are going to take kind of like a sidecar with it. So with that, let's start with these questions. First question is how to identify what's limiting endurance performance, more base work versus higher intensity. This is actually, a common question, which is like, is it high or low? What we talk about is output versus efficiency. And the honest answer is that it's only hard for people who do a lot of output to recognize when it's a deficiency on the efficiency part of it. And that the reason why that is because it's hard to contend mentally that like, man, I just can't, I just need to go harder because I can't go hard enough. But a lot of your ability to go harder and tolerate higher and higher intensities is the base of which you can process oxygen, which is the efficiency base. That is the base for aerobic endurance. And to give you, this example has been used a bunch and we've used it for years, which is to kind of give you a hierarchy. This is Styler's work, the 80-20 rule, something like that. But in reality, actually, it's way more drastic ratio than even that. So you take the German Olympic pursuit team, the 4K pursuit team, which, by all measures is a 4-minute event. That is about as intense as you can get for a cardiovascular event. And the training for that, before they set the world records, I want to say that was Athens, but I could be wrong. Whatever Olympics that they set the world record for, and I want to say it was like 350 something, which is insanely fast. They shattered the record. When they broke down kind of the disposition or the training ratios that they were working, the cyclist in that event ended up doing something like 24,000 kilometers, if I remember correctly, of cycling at below 65% intense, like a VO2 max, which ends up being roughly zone 1.5-ish, I'll call it, because it's actually lower than most people expect. So they're riding around on a bike for literally, I think if you average this out for like the speed that they could hold as professional cyclists, you're looking at guys that are like, they're on a bike for 4 to 5 hours a day, right? All year. And the 6 weeks before the event, that's when they start their intensity building. That's the only intensity they're doing is like 6 weeks before the event. And then they switch it up and they spike it, they taper for the event, and then they smash the world record. So when people are asking, where's the deficiency? Almost always the deficiency is in how much base you can get so that you can peak higher. There are obviously limitations once you start building, towards a peak of output in the aerobic channel. That's a little bit different subject. It's about like the nuances of what is stopping you from producing more output, oxygen, recoverability, stuff like that. But for this question specifically, I think most often the answer is obviously you're missing aerobic base. It is one of the most important factors, and to be fair, I've only seen this not be the limitation to that question, maybe like once or twice. The 1 or 2 times that I've seen it, it's kind of in let's call them a ultra grade endurance athlete, and they're almost like stuck in first gear. Like they can't rev very high. And it's more psychological than it is physiological. They have this built-in mechanism of conserving energy all the time. So hopefully that helps kind of answer that question. If you do have a question, what's deficient? Am I not doing enough intensity, or am I not doing enough aerobic work? 9 times out of 10, just assume you're not doing enough low aerobic work to support the high output. This leads to another question that I get often about how to like break down training. It's especially in endurance, it's really dependent on your total mileage or total volume, we'll say, a little bit more accurately, so we're not going into any one specific endeavor or sport. the total volume kind of dictates where you should run it. If you're only doing like 2 hours of work a week, you need to go harder, period. You're not doing enough to actually affect anything unless it's very punchy. If you're doing a lot of volume, then it shifts more towards that Seiler's ratio, the 80-20. And there's obviously like nuance in between here, but the middle ground is where it gets really gross. Where I've come from, and I've hit this on accident a couple times, and it not purposeful is what I'm saying. Is like that's how I noticed it worked so well. I was, side note story, if you have time for it, I was living in London, and I was training Henry for Justice League. And at the time I was like super into fitness competitions. So we're in, 2016, so it was like before Brexit. So we were in Europe technically. So we can go to all these European kind of CrossFit competitions. And 2016 was kind of the prime for CrossFit in Europe. Now, it already started dive bombing in the US and become kind of a shit show. But in Europe, it was still really fun. And especially because, I was not like the strongest athlete, but I did have a good endurance base because of my history in sports. I was able to kind of like do really well in these competitions. Anyway, I did not have time while training Henry for Justice League to really build the volume that I was used to. Like I was coming from being able to train 2 to 3 times a day, and I mean hard almost all the time. And what I got down to was like I was running around town. I was having, we were taking trains all the way out to Leavesden, which is where the studio was, but we were living in, central London. And man, I was on a train or I was walking all day long, just trying to go from one place to the other. Our gym that we were renting was in Battersea, and then we had a gym out in Leavesden, and so we were just traveling a lot. And I found myself like, I don't have much time to train. So if I was lucky, I got like 45 minutes a day or something like that, where I would just like run to the gym, throw off my stuff, and jump in whatever training session I could. I wasn't planning anything. I was just like trying to keep appearances of some kind of competitive vibe going. And I didn't think that would work very well, but I was walking a fuck ton. And I mean, 15 to 20 pound backpack, because I have all my gear, laptop, camera, stuff like that, as I'm like going back and forth, and I'm just always late. So I'm like, pretty much, if I didn't have a heart rate monitor at the time on me, but if I did have it, I think what you would see was like probably high end zone 2 for what equated to, 10 to 15 kilometers of walking every single day. And then I'd have short bursts of intervals or 11-minute little thing at the CrossFit gym, or just work up to a heavy maximal, blah blah blah, and then that was it. I really thought that this was gonna unwind. I was like feeling like I was so out of shape. Like I've never trained this little. I'm so pathetic. These are the kind of things that are going through my head, but it didn't matter because this job was the important part. And what ends up happening is I go to qualify for something called French Throwdown, which is one of the bigger qualifications. I think even now it became eventually like a regional level, CrossFit competition. So we're talking thousands and thousands of athletes kind of, try to qualify for this thing. And I try to qualify. As an individual and as a team, but I don't really have time. In fact, one of the hallmarks for this, which is kind of crazy, was one of the qualifications was a 2K row. And I was a pretty good rower at some point, but I had not rowed longer than maybe 30 seconds for probably longer than I would say a year at this point, just because of what we were focused on. And I knew, coming from a background of endurance, like, man, I don't have a base. I'm not going to be able to hold this. Well, on the day we're supposed to qualify as a team, I walk in, I've got about 30 seconds to change out of my jeans into shorts, and then no warm up. I just jump on a rower, press record on my camera for the qualification video, and I just start rowing a 2K with absolutely no warm up. And the whole time I'm like, maybe should I be conservative? Should I do this? So about halfway I realized I feel okay, and I was pacing for like, just like somewhere in the 6:45 area, because I knew that maybe I could hold that. And then I just took off. I was like, I feel fine. I'm just gonna fucking go for it. I ended up rowing like a 6:33, which was a new PR, and I was kind of like dumbfounded by this. I couldn't understand how I was able to put out better power output than I ever have, having not built a base. Not realizing that like the base that I was actually building was like what I call a 1-5. Zone 1 and zone 5 was basically all I was doing. There was no gray area there. It was either very easy work because it was me traveling and commuting, or it was very dedicated hard work, which was me, you know, trying to train as hard as I could in a condensed window. And I had some of the best results that I've ever had in competition. In fact, on that competition, I ended up qualifying on a team, but also as an individual, and I hid that from everybody. So I ended up going to the competition. I even held it from my teammates because I thought they'd be mad at me. And then last minute, I kind of had to tell them like, hey, I'm doing both. And they were kind of mad, but I just essentially did double the competition. So on the day, I was racing back and forth from doing the individual competition back into the team competition, which they weren't very clever with how they broke these things up. So I basically did every workout twice, but it was very different because one was a team format and the other was an individual format. I ended up placing decently high in the individual, I think top at least 15 or something like that. And then we did pretty poor in the team, but I was able to actually tolerate it, which was so bizarre to me. Anyway, the answer when I finally looked at the numbers and what was going on was like, oh shit, I'm basically doing zone 2 for 2 hours a day walking with a pack, and then 45 minutes of like zone 5. And over the course of a couple months, that actually turned out to be a pretty good fucking training plan by accident. I wish I could say I planned that, but I didn't. Next question: is conversational pace or nasal breathing actually a good cue for zone 2? You know, it's not bad, but I wouldn't call it even zone 2 because like, look at my nose. It's like fucking tiny nostrils. I don't have like a very well developed palate, and I can't actually zone 2 for me, breathing through my nose is like walking uphill very slowly. I can't process oxygen that high. Now, if you do have good nasal cavity and breathing structure, yeah, sure, you could hit zone 2. But the more important part, and this is what's weird, is not, you know, does conversational work? Yeah, kind of, you know, to some degree. But like I showed in a video kind of a while ago, which is like I was hitting a high zone 2, and it's very choppy conversation, actually. In fact, the hard part about that is if I can hold a conversation, I'm probably not in zone 2 just because the focus is elsewhere, and therefore the effort becomes really hard. I'm not getting as good efficiency out of it. So both those things can point you towards at least slower modalities or slowing you down a little bit, but the real measure is going to come by way of kind of like seeing blood lactate and where you start to hit that threshold of where you can't process lactate efficiently anymore, and that's a true zone 2. However, if you're not willing to do that, does it really matter if you're in zone 2 or not? I would argue not, and just like I explained in that story, it's probably better if you're actually in zone 1. I've gotten closer to this the further I get. If you, and I'll base it like this: if you're a competitive endurance athlete, you, in your domain, your monostructural movement, whatever you're doing, you should be as in high zone 2 as possible, because that is where like a lot of where you're learning to recover intra effort comes from, right? So in bike racing, for example, you'll have these surges and you'll have to know at exactly the highest pace possible that you can recover and come back to, you know, quote unquote, burn another match. And I think zone 2, high zone 2, that efficiency, that helps the best with that. However, if you are not a competitive endurance athlete, I think that's one of the dumbest things you can do, because it earmarks everything as just way too hard to build efficiency. This came up the other day with this athlete coming from High Rocks, talking about he's had so much more success because he's turned his long runs, his endurance work of running, just into bike work, and he's had so much more less injuries, yada yada yada. And I would argue, like, that's not a zone 2 thing. That's a running mismatch, or he's misunderstanding what zone 2 is in the context of running. He's probably running way harder than he thinks and thinking that it's zone 2. Even if the heart rate is stable, whatever, he's probably going off of some calculator that's not adjusting for the amount of, small muscular endurance that is overwhelmed and causing a buildup of lactic processes. So use it if you're not doing anything else, sure, but I wouldn't if you're trying to hit a very specific physiological state. Next question, building endurance versus maintaining. What's the minimum dose? This is a great question. It also is like highly dependent on what you use endurance for. Can you, the question that comes to mind as a general physical preparedness question is like, can you actively recover between sets and between efforts and between sessions? And if the answer is yes, that means you probably have a very good aerobic kind of base. It will have to be built, and this becomes the question is like how much do you need to build it? Well, it matters how much you have. To expand anything has to go into kind of like uncomfortable domain. Most people who have general physical preparedness and a general base, I think, they probably need upwards of 6 to 8 hours of volume a week to like start to antagonize it to build it out. But if I already have that and I need to build out, you have to go further. So building is always going to be kind of contingent on how much of a base that you have. And then you could calculate that just based off of like how much aerobic efforts you do per week right now. Right now, I'm doing somewhere, if I add in jiu-jitsu and all this other stuff, I probably do something between like 8 and 9 hours of quote unquote cardiovascular-ish stuff. It's about the lowest that I've ever been. At my peak though, I would say in cycling, I was riding between 24 hours, and my peak, my best week ever, my highest volume week ever was like 31 hours. My average during that time being like 20 something. So when I was like building volume, I was trying to ride between 25 and 30 hours to build out the base. The second you throw intensity, that crashes. Now that just means like, how do I build it? Most building needs about 3 months, which is why, we've done about 12 weeks of work in this program, because you need about that much time to get 3-ish sessions a week that are enough to give you enough antagonism and enough recovery time to kind of like spread the volume out. And then you probably need to maintain it for a little bit, or at least back off or taper a little bit so that you can kind of like recover fully for a 10-day period, and then you can go back into it. However, most people mentally are fried by that time, because this is like, it can be very monotonous training, especially when it's geared towards a monostructural sport. That being said, how to maintain is a little bit different. You don't need much. Endurance and aerobic ability are some of the most stable attributes that you can ever build. Like, I would say I felt finally my aerobic base kind of dip seriously after 6 years. I was like, oh shit, okay, I've lost some stuff. And I was still active, obviously, like I was doing hard, but I was doing like high intensity. I wasn't really doing base building anymore. I would rarely do like a zone 2 session or an easy run. It was like all exercise all the time. And I would say that eroded it a little bit prematurely. I probably could, if I would have just maintained like 1 or 2 sessions a week of something easy or long in the 60 to 90 minute range consistently, I would say I would have extended that another decade before I could have like, okay, now I'm at a deficit. Now I need to rebuild. Now I have to actually go and rebuild. And because I let it drop off so much, the rebuilds are never getting me back to that like 20, 30 hour volume feeling where you're like, I could just go forever. I get to the point now where I'm like, I feel good between an hour and 2 hours of actual work, and I don't feel like I have a hard time recovering from it. I think that's a good place to be, where I can tolerate 2 hours of consistent work and I can recover from that within 24 hours. Now, what do I need to maintain that? Maybe 3-4 hours a week of like, easier aerobic stuff, zone 1, zone 2. A lot of the times I can really sustain this stuff by just like going on brisk hikes. And I think that's actually better because I'm not getting kind of the muscular breakdown that's associated with like, something like running. And that seems to work for me. I think you could try it, you could play with it. It's a good question on like, whether we're pushing this to open and hold, or we're just holding it and not letting it decline. Those are two totally different intentions. It's also important when you're coming from a GPP perspective about, I want to develop power, I want to develop strength, I want to hold strength, I want to, do all of these things that are in the general physical preparedness theme. And how long do I have before I have to touch this button again? And that's a question that most people I think would be better off asking. Most people ignore it completely. They try to just hold on to everything all the time. Understand that strength and endurance are these absolutely kind of like stable, very stable, long-lasting traits. And then kind of like power and aerobic capacity, the outputs, for whatever reason, maybe it's based off of the neurology in the power output and in the like timing thing that's there. And then in the aerobic capacity, it's like just an eroding, very hard to deal with trait. Those are very volatile and they go up and down very, very fast. And you can ask anybody, they'll feel this almost immediately. Like if you don't jump or produce power for like a week or two, you feel fucking slow as shit. And if you don't do heavy breathing for like a week, you feel quote unquote out of shape. Now that's not actually true, but that's how volatile those things feel. And where I get is like most people try their hardest to maintain those aspects and then they lose the other ones that are more stable, instead of maintaining the stable ones and then oscillating the other ones. It's a deep subject. We could go pretty deep into that, but I want to move on to the other questions. How do you factor wear and tear longevity with running? Very few lifetime runners without issues. Yeah, this is a good question. It's hard to say. Obviously, some people are just not built to run very efficiently, economically, or I think the bigger problem here is how people come into running. They think they have to run, right? They think like, in order to get good at running, I got to do the running thing. I see this more often than not with people who are like maybe former runners, myself included, which is like, I want to get back into running, I want to build more base, I want to be efficient again. And I like go back to the program I was doing 15 years ago when I was running like 10 miles an hour or something. And you can't really do that. You have the memory of some sort of doing something like that. You do not have the body for it, and your tissues can't withstand that kind of stuff. Therefore, when I come back to running, older, more beat up, less able to recover, I'm gonna blame the running, even though I should just blame my brain for thinking that I could do something that I am completely out of touch with. So in this guys, I think anybody can get back to running. I don't think, aside from like the bone on bone people and maybe some like fused feet or something like that there's obvious exceptions to this, but I think a lot of it just has to do with the dosing. And this is something that this program actually addresses directly, which is why this is a great question, which is like, if you haven't run for a while, but you're like me and you do think that that's an important skill to have and keep, I have an on-ramp for it in this program that I tell people about, which is like how you should come back to running. And it isn't just like throwing yourself in the mix. It is a very methodical blend of walking and running in very short time intervals until that you can get this, until you can run nonstop without any pain or any need to really recover for like 30 to 45 minutes. I don't think you should push anything else but the development of that small musculature. I think if people did that, you would see way different longevity data in runners. Now, there are lifetime runners. Do they have issues? Yes, but is it the running or is it the fact that they didn't balance anything else? Like they never worked on their shoulder mobility, which then makes them kyphotic, which changes the angle of their hip. The shortness of the angle of the hip changes their position, and then before long, your knees are fucked up because your hip can't get into the position that it needs to run economically. And so this is all part of the, doing one thing repeatedly and not balancing it out. That's what we call accommodation. I would blame that rather than the actual act of running. Next question: how to determine the correct amount of endurance needed for sport specific or generally? Well, easy up front, the sport is going to determine the requirement. And so, mark out what the sport is. Is it an endurance sport? How long is the event? I think the training that goes into that sometimes, we used to say like build double. That's kind of overboard. I don't think you have to do that, but it's a good safe marker. So if I have like a 2-hour event, I probably want to be able to do that one thing nonstop for about 4 hours before I think that I can do it under the guise of like a competition. And I think that's still a pretty good marker, even though you get into these like weird things where then once you get into ultra, this becomes irrelevant because you're just like fucking holding on for dear life and suffering through something. That's a little bit different. But I would say that when it's sport specific, the event or the sport will determine how much base you need. Generally speaking, my general GPP perspective for endurance or aerobic ability is I think every single person needs to be able to move nonstop in one singular domain for an hour without having what we call cardiac drift, which means their body hasn't left the efficiency area in order to kind of like, start up-regulating the metabolism in order to deal with the inability to process oxygen is kind of how that works. What that means is I probably need to do work in the 90 to 2 hour range consistently and for quite a while before that hour just becomes very easy. So for the general person, I would say, can you hold a quote-unquote endurance heart rate for 90 minutes to 2 hours without having any cardiac drift? And if you can, you probably have a pretty good endurance base. If somebody degrades down to walking or whatever from running, and that's a sign that they can't uphold that one thing, that might be a muscular issue. It's hard to tell, but and a bike issue might just be like your brain can't sit on a bike for that long without feeling like it wants to run away from you, and that's also a psychological limitation. But a lot of the stuff have to do, like if you can be on a bike for 2 hours nonstop and your heart rate doesn't change and the effort stays the same, that's a good aerobic base. And I would say we'll keep it simple at that one. This next question is specific to SOF, concurrent endurance development with strong emphasis of strength and power. This one cuts to the heart, and I think, it doesn't just have to do with special operations communities or, the reason why that comes up a lot is because this is kind of like the Swiss Army knife of guys. They need to be strong. They need to be, grunt workers. They got to have a lot of capacity. They got to be able to go long. They got to be able to lift heavy. And everybody just imagines there's this like maximum diversification of skills, and, there's like the correct algorithm. A person should be able to baseline all of these attributes at once. The biggest problem with this, I think, thinking concurrently is that it leads to what we call hand in the cookie jar syndrome, which is I need so many different attributes. I try to go get one and then the other and then the other, and when I try to pull out any of them, I get nothing. That's called interference. Interference is an inability to kind of solidify a signal that is working by way of progressive overload through volume or intensity, so that you can develop an attribute correctly and to a high enough point that it becomes an attribute. And that happens because I go, we'll talk about in session, but then in just like focus. In session, it looks like, I warm up with my mobility. So I never actually get mobile because it's fucking worthless. There's no intensity put into it. So I can't actually change the function of my joints. And then, I work up to a heavy lift to keep my quote unquote strength skills. And then I hit a conditioning piece because I want to be able to breathe and I'm a bad mofo or whatever. And then, I cool down with some, let's call it like bodybuilding or, some tissue support. This looks a lot like a crossfitting program from like maybe the 2018s to 2024. This is like a very common thing in CrossFitters that were just trying to do like everything all at once. And what you found was like they didn't really do anything at all. I've run into this trap a bunch. In fact, recently I ran into it with a bodybuilding and just figured out how wrong I've done it just as of recently, because I finally took out conditioning completely and I almost doubled the amount of muscle mass that I was able to grow in a 10-week aerobic period versus something very similar that we did years previous where I kept conditioning in, and that was like, oh fuck, okay, yeah, it's interference. So with SOF, concurrent training, or just concurrent hybrid athlete, whatever you want to call it, a lot of times you can get away with it because you have opposite opposing signals, so like strength and endurance, and then people think that they would just fill in the middle. That's not true at all. But the reason why that might work is because you're oscillating on the day and you're giving just enough time to recover and set the pathway and then switch. I think this is a fine training program for some people. If you're developing those two traits, you'll just have to figure out how to fill in for the middle when it's time. And this is what throws people through probably a really large loop, is like, when the fuck am I going to do all of this shit? Like, there's only so many hours in the day. When am I going to train my, I've got to do a 2-hour run, and I've got to lift 5x5, and then I've got to do my power cleans, and I've got to do my broad jumps, and then I've got to do, my farmer carries, my grunt work, and then I've got to do my bodybuilding because I still have to look yoked for SOF or whatever. And then I also got to do my mobility, which gets skipped because that's the last thing that people think is important when given all of these options. So the truth is like, this is why we have to cycle and think about the picture in big picture, and also not in like time periods that don't make any sense. It's kind of like wanting all of the stuff at once, and you will never, if you're truly looking at GPP and being optimally, I hate that word, but being optimally powerful and optimally strong with an, let's call it a proficient endurance ability, man, that day will probably never arrive where you're like, I did it. I am strong, I am powerful, I can run fast, I can jump high, I can do all of these things. It's always kind of like doing one thing until you get good enough at it and you hate doing it, and then you switch to the other thing that you hate doing. You're just like trading one thing for another, constantly trying to work on the deficiency, and that is what saves you because you protect against interference. How to do that specifically? Build an endurance base first. You could build it alongside strength, although one of them is going to be more maintenance than the other. So I would rather say, like, whatever needs the more work, do that one first, and then maintain that one while you build the other, and then maintain that one while you build up the other. Bounce back and forth until you have stable strength and endurance, and then start to thread in power, right? And then once you get a good, once you have a good endurance base, like we said, it's very stable. Once you have a good strength base, it's very stable too. I don't need to squat 405 like ever again. I've done it. Now, could I go back and do that same exact thing? No, and I wouldn't want to because it's not worth the risk, but I still maintain a large percentage of my ability to contract maximally, even if I haven't done that movement. Now, it's not going to feel great because I'm missing a lot of like neurological efficiency in that movement. But if I go pick up a heavy barbell, I can pick up something heavy. I have the ability. You maintain quite a bit of the ability. Most people get tricked into using the exercise as the measurement, and that doesn't really matter. So that's kind of how I would coordinate, especially from, I would say professions that require a true general physical preparedness, is thinking about waiving these things intelligently, and so they work for your given domain. If you're going to selection, or whether you're actually being pushed into operations, those are two totally different things. Obviously, for like selection processes, I'm going to prioritize the fuck out of endurance and localized muscular endurance, strength endurance, whatever you want to call it. And then, for the actual job, I'm going to maintain everything. I'm not pushing anything. If my job is to go kick in doors at midnight and, do Goonie shit or whatever, I want my shoulder health good. I want to make sure my brain feels good. I'm not going to be doing Fran and then dropping off of a little bird into dangerous situations, risking like a slow nervous system because I fried it doing a WOD. I'm going to do something very, very different. Now, we were a friend of mine who is in the SOF community, and I have been talking about this for years. We started putting a program together that was pretty funny, and then I got distracted like I usually do. We do have a lot for this specific thing about how to maintain, how to develop in ways that are applicable to the actual operator job, as opposed to just like beating somebody down through selection and then letting them go through a life thinking that they have to like continually select themselves. So I hope that answers the question. It's deep. It's got a it's got a lot of inference there that applies to other things other than the SOF community. So I hope people will be able to at least take something out of that and use it. Next question. What do most endurance programs get wrong? What's different about my approach? Now, I think I've covered most of this, but just to rehash, I don't look at other endurance programs because I'm not like, I think the difference and the easy thing to point out is because I know kind of like what they are, right? Like they are a progressive volume program for a single domain, generally speaking. And even if you get to the good programs, and I'll like shout out to like Evoke and kind of the uphill athlete Scott and Steve House, who were programming this stuff like legitimately for like world-class endurance athletes. It just gets so specialized and so metric-y, and nothing against them. They know exactly what they're doing, but I'm just not interested in that kind of training. And unless I'm, I think it appeals to people who are doing that kind of thing, like your Kilian Jornets or whatever. He wants to know how to run, 900 miles in 2 seconds or whatever the fuck, or run up Everest nonstop, whatever like these freaks can do. That's awesome. That is where the science evolves. That's where people are like really pushing the limits of their knowledge. And I applaud that, but I'm also like, I'm not interested in a diluted Kilian Jornet program in order to learn how to run better. What this program really covers and why it's different is because, like I talked about, it is about general capacity. It's about providing oxygen and blood flow through like systemically through your body. And that's really what I've worked on, trying to integrate different concepts into this program. What not just like getting good at running and have a quote unquote high VO2 max or high lactic threshold or whatnot, but quite literally trying to just like feel that I feel okay, I feel efficient moving my body in any direction that I'm required to, even with it a little bit of weight or not weight or uphill or downhill or like whatever it is. There's like different attributes to all of those things. I really wanted to build something that was for that. So I hope that answers it a little bit. Next question is fueling and recovery balancing with strength work. Again, this is one of the missed topics of endurance, I think, so frequently, is not what kind of work that I do, but how are you recovering from the work that you are doing? Otherwise, you're not setting the signal. So it's a great question in the fact that like, how do you do it? Well, you become as mindful with the recovery process as you do with the work process. And that might come from understanding just like the in-depth nature of your own body, understanding HRV and waking heart rate and tap tests for your nervous system. That, there's no real answer to other than like you really have to deep dive into this one question, which I think nobody asked, which is like, am I truly recovered? Have I recovered from the previous effort? And in progressive overload for a very specific sport, and this is where, maybe somebody will try to fight me over this, but you're trying to actually kind of layer the load so that you kind of deal with the systemic effect of that microcycle or macrocycle or whatever you want to call it, so that you get this compounding effect of supercompensation. Nobody that I know, even competitive athletes, are fucking trying to do that today. They're literally just trying to learn the sport and stay fit and like express it favorably. So I think like, unless you're on track for, the next Olympic pathway to skiing or whatever, a lot of people aren't going to be able to, they're not going to be like thinking about supercompensation. So it comes back down to, did I recover from this session? Did I get the attributes that I wanted to from that? And now strength works on these like 10 to 12 day cycles. So you won't gain the actual strength that you know about until like 10 to 12 days after that session. That means it's not paying off for a while, but you're squatting every day and not like getting that. So what this question is really geared towards is like, how do I know that I recovered from something? That's a tough question. It's something you should ask yourself. If you're training a lot, you should ask yourself every day, man, what did I recover from that, or am I just tolerating the fatigue from it? And 90% of the time, I haven't adapted to the actual work that I've done. I'm an exercise-aholic. I just love training. I don't really give a fuck about the performance either. I just love the feeling of training. So there's very few times that I've actually recovered for something, admittedly, which is kind of embarrassing saying that this is kind of what I teach people, but I kind of like blow through that door. My focus is always on like, do I enjoy this? Am I getting better? The getting better is kind of like a secondary thing to, do I enjoy this? And if you really do want to improve, I think you have to understand what the markers look like for when you actually recover from something. All right, so how many days a week of endurance versus strength or capacity, etc.? Well, this is a general question. Again, it comes back to kind of like interference. What are you trying to get good at? If you are just trying to maintain endurance ability, you don't need much, like one session a week, and the rest can be kind of whatever, or 2 sessions a week, or whatever it ends up being. If you're trying to get good at something else at the same time as this, good luck. You'll have to break it up how you see fit. Again, because, a secondary thing, it comes back to what you can recover from, not necessarily what days are correct and what are not. I know some people who can recover within a couple hours and change and move on something else and then do that. Now, these are generally very young people, and they have nothing else to do but nap and eat in between, or take copious amounts of exogenous chemicals in order to help them promote this recoverability in between sessions, so they can tolerate a lot more. The general consensus is I would say my general consensus, I don't think, I think you get 3 hard signals every 9 days or so. I stick by that. It used to be a week, and I've extended it. And the reason I've extended it is because I'm just not convinced that you're recovering within a week. I think the week timeline has really changed people's perspective on how they should change. And it has to do with like when you're supposed to be at work. It has nothing to do with whether your biology is adapting or not. So the 9-day schedule is essentially you get 3 hard sessions. What this does is, now hard means it's a signal. Hard is not like it feels hard. Of course it fucking feels hard. It's heavy, or it's long, or it's whatever. Hard identifies that you have moved your physiology into a state of flux. So your body's like, man, I don't want to feel like that because it was stressful. What can we upregulate in order to not feel like that? That's the fitness. That's your body upregulating the processes that you feel as quote unquote fitness. Well, you can only do that so often because you only have the mental bandwidth to, and you only can recover from so much. Next, that doesn't mean that's all your training. That's just like the 3 hard sessions. The other sessions are kind of like maintaining or greasing the groove. Yeah, I'm exercising. I'm just like moving the body. I'm not standing still. I'm helping that process happen. Now, what you fit into any of these, that's anybody's guess, and there's lots of different ways to do it. It's a very complex question, but in regards, because this is about endurance, I would say endurance you can actually tolerate a lot more from, especially because this is kind of the trick. The more endurance you build, the better you can actually tolerate other training sessions. This is the benefit of building an endurance base for strength athletes. If you take the time to truly develop truly develop an aerobic base, kind of by the markers that we talked about, being able to run nonstop for like 2 hours or something like that. Sets and reps of like shoulder presses are not going to stop you. A good antidote for this, friend Jamie Lavelle, he is a black belt in jiu-jitsu. He's phenomenal. He is a former Cat 2 cyclist. We used to ride bikes together. We used to do all this stuff. We train a lot together. We train jiu-jitsu together. He trains in our gym. He is a perfect example of this. He built such a massive base with cycling, and he maintains quite a bit of it. Now, he's not doing what he used to do. We're talking about an insane person here. He was doing like 5 and 6 hour training rides indoors with the lights off, like just pure zone 2. And I mean like real zone 2. In fact, I think he set the state TT championship. He is an aerobic monster. And he maintained a lot of that. And here's what's wild. When he came back to jiu-jitsu and he started like competing and rolling all the time, this guy can fucking train all day. You can't stop him. So when he came back to jiu-jitsu, I had been doing jiu-jitsu, and he came back as like a purple belt, and he got his brown belt, and I was like a blue belt at the time. And, you know, he's really good, so I'm not saying anything about that. He was already good. But the levels that he has been able to jump are incredible. Like, his jiu-jitsu is so fucking good. And I want to say, when he started back, I could see where he was ahead of me, but now I can't even see where he's at. And I would say one of the reasons for that, A, he's way more focused on jiu-jitsu than me, but B, this is not just me, it's him in comparison to the same people that I've watched learn jiu-jitsu at the same time. He is light years ahead of them, and it has nothing to do with talent. It has nothing to do with anything except for the fact of how much volume he can tolerate of training, which means he's hyper efficient. So when we're rolling, he's not breathing hard, right? It's like not even zone 1 for him, and not even close. And no matter who he rolls with, he's really not affected by the aerobic nature of rolling. And he can roll hard, sure, he can like get after it, but he can just maintain this pace, which gives him not only the physical ability, but the mental ability to pay attention for longer, which means by the time I'm tired of drilling a move, I'm like, I'm fucking tired of this, it doesn't work. He can do it for another 2 hours, which means like if you just, that's an exponential rate, right? That is compound interest. So when you're talking about this question about how many days a week can I do X, Y, or Z, well, that depends on your endurance base, which is the whole reason to build it in the first place, which is you can do so much more if you upregulate your efficiency, your aerobic efficiency, not only just in the physical sense, in the mental sense too, because if I can keep going for longer and longer and longer, it means I make better decisions, I develop more skills, I recover faster between sets and harder efforts. The list to what endurance touches is almost endless. And I think, you know, on that note, great questions, great insight. People are on the right pages. I get that I probably didn't answer everything like somebody would want me to, but that is kind of what I want to finish on, is the fact that like endurance is such an absolutely overwhelmingly, I don't know, call it profitable trait, because it affects every part of your life. It gives you a tool that you can just amplify everything that you touch, because you're not affected by an aerobic deficiency. You're not tired. And that is something that you can feel. So thanks for your questions. If you have more questions, I can do another one of these. I would say go ahead and drop them down in the comments, and I'll screenshot them, and we can do this again if this didn't clear anything up, or you think that there's something that I didn't touch in this video. Would love to hear it. Enjoy. Check out the endurance program. It's a 12-week program. It's on weareallin.com. I went to town on it. There's a lot in there. There's a lot of information, including articles, videos. It's just a ton. I can't even describe. There's manuals on how to take care of yourself, math score, all of that stuff is there. If you're interested in it, it's just part of the All-In membership, and you can join that if you want access to it. If you have any more questions, let me know. Enjoy.